Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Nick Patoski. He's going to share some great stories about Stevie Ray Vaughan.
In the spring of 1980, Joe King goes back and has his 15 minutes in New York. Lester Bangs does a cover story on him. The Soho News. Hilly Crystal plasters the town with posters of his CBGB's appearance, which Stevie shows up at with his manager, Francis Carr. Francis had contacted me when Joe King was blowing up about she's starting a management company. She was a horsewoman coming from a very wealthy family in Corpus Christi, but she had spent time as road managing the Grateful Dead. So she comes back to Austin, opens up a horse race track with Sam Cutler of the Grateful Dead. Then a guy shows up, part of that orbit, Chesley Milliken, who was part of the Dead crew, but it also he'd run Epic Records in England, and British guy, kind of a piece of work. But Chesley and Francis are looking to manage someone, and they approached me briefly, and it's like, no, I want to do this myself. I had a couple other good opportunities that I should have taken that I didn't, but that's when they pick up Stevie. And you can see what happens then. And when, I think Mick Jagger's coming to buy horses from them. Ron Wood comes to buy horses. Anyhow, when Joe King plays that in the fall or spring of 1980, does this 2-week sweep of New York, we party at Francis's with Stevie, and she's got an apartment catty corner from the Plaza Hotel in New York overlooking a penthouse apartment. Her regular house is back in Texas, but we're around some, and this is money and stuff, and you see what's happening because Francis has the financial wherewithal, and Chesley has the connections, and Chesley gets a gig at the Dance Interior for Stevie, and Mick Jagger shows up, and you see pictures of that, and everybody starts hearing about things, and then Montreux happens. That's another Chesley deal. He knows Claude Nobbs, and gets Stevie to play the Montreux Jazz Festival, in which they're booed. They're not, evidently for the Euros, they're not that, they're not pure enough or whatever. And they're booed at their performance, but Jackson Browne hears them, and David Bowie hears them, and Stevie ends up playing after they have the concerts, and then there's club gigs, and he ends up playing the next night, the club gig, late at night. Bowie and Browne are flipping to where Browne says, hey, come to California, use our studio at any time. And Bowie is, let's work something out. And so you're reading about these things happening that, Stevie's going to play with Bowie. He's going to have his band open up shows for Bowie. He's touring. They're up in Dallas rehearsing. And somehow it all falls apart. Stevie's not going to do it. He says he wants to do his own band. And I remember everybody thinking, God damn, he's just destroyed his career. He can play with David Bowie. And he did record on the album, he recorded the single Let's Dance, which was a huge hit for Bowie and helped bring him apart, a bigger audience. And you can hear in that song, in that lead break, that's Texas blues. And it comes through. If you can hear Stevie playing on there. And everybody thought that was pretty cool. And he's blowing off Bowie. Well, Bowie was nickel and diming. I think somehow offering his band something like $500 or $1,000 a gig to open up for him when he's playing these arenas. And Stevie got mad and, oh man, this is horrible. God, he's just destroyed his career. And the guys, they've done some demos here in Austin, but they call Jackson Browne. And Jackson Browne has probably forgotten his promise. But no, they didn't even call him. They just showed up and basically used Jackson Browne's studio to do recording. And the band, John Hammond discovered him, signed him to Columbia. It was a standard deal. And Hammond wasn't doing that much at that time. So it was kind of like a good career move for both of them. But it wasn't like Stevie signed a deal that was going to make him rich. It was a pretty standard record contract. But he got signed. And then, Texas Flood comes out, and he becomes discovered and, follows it up with Couldn't Stand the Weather. And all of a sudden in Austin, the Young Eager Puppy has eclipsed, the guys with class, the Fabulous Thunderbirds. The Thunderbirds are kind of, they're having their hits and their success, but they're almost a cult band compared to Stevie, because Stevie is playing almost immediately. He's reached a bigger audience. And it's that audience that wants to hear Hendrix. So it's happy to hear Hendrix channeled, because this guy does it better than all these other, there were a lot of Hendrix imitators out there that were touring. This guy does a set, a few Hendrix songs, and man, he's got them down cold. And plus, he's turning on these great unwashed people to what they don't know is blues. It's just, rock and roll, whatever. This is a guy that triggers what is a modern blues revival, not just in the United States, but globally, because he wasn't pure enough, because he could reach out. And, and it took him a while, like 79, he stops in Nashville to do a recording with my friend Joe Gracie, who is a disc jockey on Coke FM, and started, after Coke FM went under, started recording a bunch of people locally in the basement of Coke FM on a 4-track, including Joe King, including Stevie Vaughan. But Joe has met his idol, and that's a guy named Jack Clement. And Joe wants to be Jack Clement. And he talked Cowboy into his, letting him use his studio. And he records Double Trouble with Luann Barton on their way to New York. And it's a pretty notable recording. Tapes are out there. But by the time they get to New York, Luann has left the band. She has gone off on bender after bender and a terror. And, she'll resurface later with her own album involving Glenn Frey and Jerry Wexler. But she's too much for Stevie. And at that point, it gets stripped down to a power trio. I call it a power trio, but it's the trio. And it took a while that Jackie Newhouse, who was also from Fort Worth, was the bass player. And it's when Stevie found that Tommy Shannon was available, Jackie kind of got jettisoned, and not in a good way, but Stevie wanted Tommy because he knew Tommy from Johnny Winter, the original Johnny Winter band that played Woodstock and all that. And Tommy had his issues and had been in and out, but nothing much had happened. And Stevie and Tommy had both had some, I don't think they played at the same time with a band, kind of a blues rock band called Cracker Jack in the early 70s. But when Tommy joined, then it was complete. That was the power trio. And that was a perfect trio from which to launch a blues band. Because Stevie, with a two-piece behind him, he could play lead and rhythm parts, and he wanted to. And it was, later on he added, Reese Winans on keyboards, and he kind of expanded his sound. He did recordings with horns and stuff like that. But it was that trio setup and the addition of Tommy Shannon that basically put all the pieces together. And from there, it just, it went nuts.